What's that? Who there? Whoa.
All right, guys, I've got Brian Chen, the co-founder and CEO of Room. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm pumped. So let's dive right in and start with your background. So I know you've had some incredible experiences across Endeavor, launching Bluesmart. You went through YC and now with Room. And I want to talk about all those things. But let's kind of start just with a snapshot from your perspective of your background. You know, who are you and what's your path been leading up to thinking about Room?
Yeah. I was born in Colorado. That's, going back all the way to the very beginning. But I actually moved to Taiwan with my parents when I was 11. So split my time growing up between the US and Taiwan. It's hard to imagine two places that are as different as Colorado and Taiwan. But really, from a young age, I was just fascinated with the concept of entrepreneurship. And especially kind of after going to Taiwan, I grew up around stories of how entrepreneurs move societies forward. Taiwan was a developing country in the 70s and doing really kind of low-tech manufacturing, and there was a semiconductor boom, and all of a sudden Taiwan was kind of on the map when it comes to technology, and it was very much because of these entrepreneurs. So this concept was always very fascinating to me. So that's always what I've wanted to do. Right? I've always wanted to start a business, but my education was very much a liberal arts education. I studied English literature and economics at a small liberal arts college, which I loved, and then have since then kind of taken a meandering path to learn as much as possible as I can to kind of be able to build the businesses that ultimately I've built over the last several years.
That's awesome. So I want to start with Endeavor, and I don't think a ton of people will be familiar with it, but as I was reading up on it, it sounds like one of the coolest jobs in the world that you had. And it basically was you were evaluating international entrepreneurs to determine if they got funding effectively. And so can you talk a little bit about that and like what was the criteria you were using to decide who you would fund?
Yeah, so it's a nonprofit organization that basically where the mission is to identify, support, invest in high impact entrepreneurs around the world, right? And so it was the kind of best job I could have had in my early to mid 20s because I was traveling around the world, meeting entrepreneurs in all sorts of different places, right? I traveled to over a dozen countries. I met people from Argentina, from Jordan, Indonesia, really all over. And these are people who are, have that entrepreneurial bug, and they are passionate about solving the problem that they have and building a business and overcoming obstacles that make the challenges of trying to build a startup in the US laughable, right? So it was an incredibly inspiring experience for me because I saw these people overcome odds and overcome environments that make not just starting a business difficult, but living difficult, right? So it was really for us. There's a strong impact component, right? So it was about how many jobs would this company be able to create, and would this actually become a company that has outsized impact. Every startup ecosystem has a number of companies that end up just having outsized impact because of the wealth creation that results from success, or because of the mentorship, or just even the storytelling that results from success. So when I was traveling around the world and looking at entrepreneurs, meeting them, talking about what they wanted to do, that was the lens. It was, can this person become the next story that the people in this country tell that will inspire folks like I had been in Taiwan, where it's like, oh, okay, it is possible. That is a path that I can take. And so that was really what we were looking for at Endeavor. Like I said, it was probably the best job I could have taken when I was in my early mid-20s because it was so inspiring.
It's incredible. Yeah. And so you went from Endeavor, you went to MIT for business school, and then you ultimately dropped out of MIT to start Bluesmart. And so I'd love to get your take on, you know, at the time, dropping out of MBA is no small feat. I know it's celebritized, but to do it, you obviously had a great reason and a big vision for Bluesmart. So take us through, like, at that moment, what was the vision for Bluesmart, and why was it so exciting to drop out?
The vision for Bluesmart was around how we could take all of the advances in technology and connectivity and mobility into the travel experience. So the first product that we developed was very simple, but it was a carry-on suitcase that had technology embedded inside. So things like location tracking, weight sensing, remote Bluetooth lock, so that all of those like pain points that you have when you're traveling. It's hard to remember what it's like to travel given we've been in the pandemic for so long. But things like the airline rejecting your suit, giving you a surcharge because your bag is too heavy, or the airline losing your bag. We were trying to solve all of those problems that are frequent for travelers to experience by introducing technology into the actual travel accessories that we have and connecting them to your phone. Right. So the vision was smoothing out an otherwise cumbersome travel experience by using technology, and it was exciting because we had this idea and this vision, and we threw it up on a crowdfunding site. Right? We threw it up on Indiegogo, and from one day to the next, literally, maybe it took like 2 or 3 weeks, but we went from 0 customers to 10,000 people who had given us money to receive the product that we had conceived. And that was a couple $1,000,000, right? So we went from just this idea, but then very quickly through crowdfunding, to having tens of thousands of people who said, "Hey, here's my money. I want to have this product." And that was definitely very exciting. Alongside the crowdfunding success that we had early on, we got accepted into Y Combinator. And for me, the MBA was in a lot of ways a stepping stone for me to try to build my own business and gain the skills that I felt I maybe was lacking, or that I wanted to add to the toolkit before starting a business. And so I got a ton of value from being at MIT for one semester. I met a ton of people, learned a lot in the classes, but ultimately, with what was waiting at Bluesmart and what was waiting with the experience of going through Y Combinator, for me, it was a very straightforward decision because I had a very clear kind of end goal, which was I wanted to become an entrepreneur myself.
Definitely. Yeah, and I wanted to press on the Y Combinator experience. So we've had Mateo from 8 Sleep, we've had Steven from Burrow who went through the program, and they shed light on it. And I think our listeners love hearing, your mentality going in, you just described, but what did you get from that program, right? It's an immersive, hands-on, brutal in some ways in terms of how much input's required, but talk through that program and how the business looked coming out of it.
Yeah, I love the experience. And I thought that I knew what to expect because I had spent time at Endeavor working with high impact entrepreneurs around the world. But even still, the experience at Y Combinator was lots of new and interesting learnings for me, right? So I think the amazing thing is first of all, the people that you do meet, not just the people who go through Y Combinator with you, but the people who have gone in the past, and being able to tap into that YC alumni community is something that continues, honestly, to pay dividends, right? It's just an amazing group of people, and people view it as a community where they help each other. It's really kind of a very open community where people want to help, which is very hard to find, right? But it's one thing that I think was interesting is YC has a very maybe like a prescriptive view of how to build a startup. They have very strong opinions about what to do and what not to do. I remember, I think the first email that we got in my batch that came from Paul Graham, somebody had asked to do a meetup with all the fintech founders. And Paul Graham writes an email 15 minutes later and says, "This is exactly what we don't want you to do when you're going through YC. We want you to be talking to customers and building your product. And that's all you should be focused on. Forget the meetups, forget the, advisory boards and all this other stuff that sounds like you're doing a startup." So I thought it was a very refreshing perspective that has stuck with me in terms of how to build a business and the laser focus that is required on just a couple of things.
Yeah, that focus is so critical. We've heard that from a lot of founders over the past few weeks. It's forget about all the icing, focus on those core things. So I'm curious with Bluesmart. So you guys ultimately sold the Travel Pro, although I know because of the travel bans on the batteries in Suitcase, you ultimately had to shut down the company per se. I'm curious from your perspective, did you view it as a success or kind of like a failure that there was a lot more to go, and you kind of took the path of least resistance? Walk me through that a little bit.
Yeah, it was certainly not the type of outsized success that you set out to achieve when you set out to build a business, right? So from the perspective of what I was talking about in terms of storytelling and saying this was a company that made a huge impact in the industry and changed the way that we travel forever. Unfortunately, we didn't achieve that goal. But personally, I consider it a huge success for me because I learned so much from that experience and met so many people as well, right? And I think that there would, at least for me personally, there would be no room without Bluesmart. A lot of the decisions, a lot of the way that we've approached things, especially in the early days, are direct. There's a very clear path from mistakes or other things that we did at Bluesmart to things that we did at Room, right? So, for me, yeah, I've no regrets about that entire experience and loved every moment of it. And it ultimately there was no better business school than to build a startup from scratch, ship product to tens of thousands of people around the world, and build a team and go through all of the ups and downs of that. So in that sense, from a learning perspective, I would say massive success.
Definitely. And those learnings, obviously, like you said, compounded into Room, and that's what I'm really curious about. Before we shift into the business of Room, at that moment, right, as Bluesmart's winding down, it sounds like your mindset was fairly positive. You got all these learnings, but like during that interim period, what other ideas were you immediately shifting to the next thing, and what ideas were you toying with before Room came along? Like, walk me through that interim period.
Yeah, so I would say, well, in the process of leaving or winding down, there's because building a startup is so consuming. There was definitely a period of time where it was just, okay, let's decompress and focus on wellness. Actually, right after I left Bluesmart, I went to Australia for a month and did this bunch of scuba diving and really just tried to eat well and exercise a bunch and enjoy, read a lot, enjoy what Australia had to offer. So it was definitely just decompression and focusing on self kind of in that interim period. But that interim period is also when the world opens up in terms of possibility, because you go from a world where you're super laser focused on something to all of a sudden understanding that, wow, there are all these opportunities, and it's very fun to explore and to brainstorm and to think about what's possible. During that period of time, I spent actually, spent a lot of time with other founders, talked through their journeys, did a little bit of advising, consulting with founders, and had a couple of projects that I was working on, and that was kind of the mentality. It was like, I want to do some consulting, do some projects, and kind of see what ends up grabbing my attention and what ends up being super interesting. And going from was probably maybe doing some consulting work for two founders, had maybe a couple projects for myself, and ultimately decided that Room is what I wanted to do and pursue full time.
Yeah. And so I love clicking into that kind of mentality or the way you assess or founders assess that market opportunity. So you had these other projects. There was something about those that either they weren't fun for you or you didn't think the market opportunity was big enough or whatever. And then with Room, those factors, those questions were obviously answered differently. So how did you look at it and what were those key insights you had about Room that you feel like the market was missing?
I think in that brainstorming phase, it's always easy, and it's always a lot of fun also to just kind of think about what the world is missing or think about what could be. And it's very easy to come up with ideas that sound great, right? But I think, and that's what makes it fun, right? The way I think about it is a little bit like, a cat and a ball of yarn. And all of these different ideas are it's a ball of yarn, and you're pulling the yarn. Sometimes you lose interest because inevitably your first idea or your first iteration of the idea is not going to be the right one, right? So you really have to pull at that yarn until you figure out, okay, wow, this is something that is interesting, it's motivating, it's real, the customers want it, and everything does kind of click. And for me, that is what got me into Room. So I had a couple of two YC founders reach out to me after I left Bluesmart. Ryan Peterson, who's the founder of Flexport, and Henrik Zilmer, who's the founder of AirHelp. And they reached out and they said, hey, we have this problem. As they were growing their companies and into thousands of people, they had this problem with lack of privacy and noise in the office. And they said, we think that there's a market and a company to be made and built by creating phone booths for offices. And I kind of thought about it, and I was like, okay, this can be one of the projects that I think about. And there was but I continued to pull that yarn, and it was a process of discovery for me, where the question was, okay, why does this problem exist? Why is it that offices are so terrible? People hate open floor plans. Why do we live like that? And why is there a gap in the market? How did the industry miss such a big problem? And just kind of pulling at that yarn, I realized that, first of all, there aren't any brands that resonate with the modern workforce. They're all built from prior generations. Herman Miller and Steelcase are companies that are over 100 years old and priced insanely high. That kind of prices them out of a lot of companies and people. But also realized that work was changing so rapidly, and the way that we want to engage with commercial real estate is changing so quickly that it was very hard to keep up for the companies that actually design workspaces. And they ignored the need for privacy. And gradually this became the vision for Room, where we're not just trying to build a phone booth business, but we're really trying to change the way that offices are built and the way that they're deployed to make them a lot more adaptive, to make floor plans and offices flexible, and so that they can actually be the best and most optimized office for the people inside. And that's a massive change in the way that we think about offices and the way that we build offices. And that got me really, really excited. And that's why ultimately my co-founder and I decided to say, this is what we want to do, and this is what we want to build, and this is a vision that we can imagine working on for 10 plus years.
Yeah. It's funny the way you frame it. I think like offices are really built to be kind of static, but really people are dynamic. They shift all the time. You need that like modular setup. And I know we didn't mention this. I'll mention it in the intro, but do you want to just give the 2-minute on room, like what products do you go to market with today other than the phone booth, and kind of what are the metrics that you share publicly around growth and customers and things like that?
Yeah. So we started off with the soundproof phone booth that ships flat and assembles on site and gives companies a little bit of privacy and peace and quiet in the office. But we design, build, sell modular architectural products that help offices adapt their floor plans to the needs of the people inside. So we really are trying to reimagine the modern workplace and create these great workplace experiences through modular products. We launched in 2018. We, by the end of our second year of business, had over 3,000 unique business customers that we had sold to, and over $28 million, over $40 million of revenue. And from there, we went on to raise our Series A and expand our portfolio in realization of this vision that I was mentioning.
Yeah, the industrial design is unbelievable. Like I think it's when you look at the room products, I've never seen anything like them, and I think it speaks to how fast the growth was. Because I'm sure, I imagine your kind of ideal customer profile is like a high growth, kind of small to mid-sized company. It's expanding rapidly, wants to be modular, and those companies are share all the time, right? And people are in and out of those offices, and so I imagine it's a pretty viral product inherently.
Yeah, I think. So the industrial design, first of all, credit goes to my co-founder and our head of design. I very much there to their credit. They're super talented and have driven a very strong design vision that's been a huge part of our success. It's foot traffic that ends up being the biggest driver of growth for us. Either people walk into an office and they say, "Hey, what is that product? And why are people in it all the time?" Or it's this experience where we're doing a video conferencing call and you see me inside of a structure and you ask, "Hey, what is that?" So it is a product that definitely lends itself to that type of viral loop, right? Where foot traffic and usage are the primary drivers of growth for us.
Something that I love to get into with founders is this idea of, in the early days, for most businesses, it seems like there's a couple of things or assumptions that have to be true for the business to succeed past that initial kind of first year or two. And usually, at least the founders I've had on this show, they talk about, like these were the holes that I potentially poked, or concerns or potential doubts. And then looking back, it's easier to explain, okay, this didn't come true, or this did, but it wasn't as big of a factor. For you, what were those things in the early days that you guys bet on that had to be true, and then obviously ended up being true with all the growth and success you've had?
One thing that had to be true was the willingness of people to buy our product online, just like they would buy any other consumer product. We had this hypothesis that we could go to market with our product very much the way that you go to market with any other e-commerce digitally native brand. And that wasn't an immediately obvious thing, because in selling to companies and offices, that's a B2B transaction. People typically don't go online to outfit their office with office furniture or office architecture, right? And we had this thought that, with the trend of consumerization of enterprise and people wanting to have consumer-like experiences, even at work, we had this hypothesis that we could sell to office managers and sell to businesses in that consumer fashion. Fortunately, that proved to be true. And fortunately, when it comes to, I guess, the industry of commercial interiors, that's the minority viewpoint. There's a whole very antiquated world of exchanging PDFs, asking for quotes and discounts to buy something as simple as a chair, and that is predominantly today the way that companies buy office furniture, and we've started to change that.
Yeah, that's great. And on the flip side of that, people love hearing about things that didn't work, even if they're not backbreakers or huge deal breakers. But from you, as you reflect over the past couple of years, what have been some of the areas where you made medium to big size bets and they just didn't end up panning out? Whether it's marketing, growth, decisions with the product, et cetera. I'd love for you to dive into any of those that come to mind.
I was thinking about this, and I think the mistake or the things that don't work that haven't worked for me in the past have been rushed hiring decisions. I think, a company is people, so who you hire, who you bring to the company is, really is the most important thing you can do, especially in the early stages, right? And so getting people wrong can be highly detrimental, right? And if you're a founder, you're trying to hire for roles that you've never held yourself. You're trying to fill skill gaps where you may not always know what that skill even looks like or what excellence looks like in any particular function. I think a huge amount of work needs to go into understanding a job requirement and understanding what the difference is between someone who's average in that role versus somebody who's excellent in that role. And sometimes if you're growing very, very quickly, it's easy to have someone come across your desk, come through the network, and you're like, okay, wow, this person checks a lot of the boxes and understands what I need. And inevitably, whenever that's been a rushed decision or rushed process, I feel that it's gone haywire.
Yeah. Where does that go wrong? Like if everything's good on paper, and one of the things I'm assuming is on paper doesn't equal high productivity, but when you look at those signals, what is usually the reason why it doesn't work out?
It takes time and effort to understand what excellence looks like in a role. And it takes time and effort to understand what you need as well. And if you skip the steps of figuring out what you need or figuring out what excellence looks like, then and you find someone who appears to check a lot of boxes, then you're just kind of you're entering yourself into a lottery, right? And that's I think that's almost always a mistake. There's I think it's a kind of like a algorithm math question, I think called the Secretary problem, where let's say you have 100 secretaries candidates that you're interviewing, and you're going through them one by one, and after each interview you have to decide, should I hire this secretary or not? And if you do, then you hire the person. If you don't, then you get to interview the rest. And so there's a question of how many secretaries should you interview before you hire the best one up until that point. And I think the takeaway what I take away from this kind of algorithmic question is you don't hire the first. If you have 99 candidates behind the first candidate, you don't hire the first. And I think I think that there's the rule is something that it's about a third. Like, kind of, if you run this experiment over and over again, it's really about 33, something like that, candidates that you should see first before you hire, the best that you've seen, to maximize your probability that you actually do get the best possible secretary. So, and I think that's I think about kind of that framework when we're doing our hiring.
Yeah, I love that you called that out because I feel like in startups, nothing is more fast paced. You never have less time, and what you're saying is, in order to hire correctly, you have to over dedicate or dedicate even more time to it. And so I think people often miss that or skip that. It's funny you bring it up because it's a question that I asked to almost everyone on the show, and to build on that, I'm curious how you think about. So you've gone through this a lot. Obviously, you've had great hires. It sounds like you've got burned a few times, or maybe more than a few. What process do you use to try to identify that excellence? Because I think it's easy for people. Well, what you're saying, it's not easy for people to identify what traits that they're looking for. That's like hard enough. But then the second part is, once you have that benchmark, what are you doing to try to wade through the kind of like surface level resume type stuff to really decide if someone is excellent?
I mean, oftentimes I ask the candidates themselves, like, what does excellence look like? Tell me what average looks like and what excellence looks like, and that actually is oftentimes a very telling question. But then I also what I try to do, to wade through, right, just what a resume will look like, or looks like, is I try to reach out to my network, whether it's other founders or my investors, and I say, hey, I'm looking for X position, looking for, I don't know, VP of sales or CFO. I want to know, like, I want to talk to the best CFO that you've ever worked with, and then by meeting these people and understanding their view of what excellence looks like, then I can actually start to formulate, what are the things I'm looking for, and it can be tough. It can be, because calibration takes time, and that's what it is. It's a process of calibration, but it takes time. It slows things down sometimes. It can slow recruiting process. It can feel process heavy. But I have, over and over again, found it just to be an invaluable part of my hiring process.
Yeah, I love that. That's super tactical. So I appreciate that. I want to talk about the impact of COVID on the business, and I hate to even go down this road, but I think your business is probably really unique to look at because on the one end, you digitize and used e-commerce to provide transactions to something that was traditionally, brick and mortar per se. So that probably helped. But then your end customer, the offices, all shut down for 12 months. And so there was nowhere for those to go if people bought them. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what does the future look like? And maybe before that, what happened to the business in the last 12 months, and how have you kind of addressed that as a CEO?
I got to say, it's been some of the most challenging moments of my professional life, for sure. This pandemic. You're right. Our product primarily sells into offices where knowledge workers spend time, and knowledge workers are the most easily transitioned into remote work settings, and the last people who will kind of return into normal work environments, right? And so it has been a tremendously challenging period of time. But actually, what's so interesting about this pandemic is that it's short-term pain that's also been paired with an acceleration of some of the trends that we were counting on. So we expect that flexibility and the demand for flexibility is only going to increase. And the need for as we move towards more of a hybrid world where it's in person and remote, the need to be able to adapt your floor plans to how your people actually use your office is going to be a very pressing pain point that people are desperate to solve. And so it's been short-term pain followed by like long-term tailwinds as well, medium to long-term tailwinds. And so that's the kind of tornado that we have to navigate. What we've done is, I would say, it's forced us to become to really build in a lot more resilience in who we are as a company. And resilience, what I mean by that is across multiple dimensions. There's product resilience. We went from being having this star, product or soundproof office phone booth to actually now diversifying our product portfolio. During the pandemic, we've introduced 3 new products that will help people reconfigure their floor plans as they return. It's also forced us to become more resilient in terms of the markets that we serve. So we were predominantly, call it 90% North America focused when we entered the pandemic. And what we've been able to do since March is actually grow our European presence in business. And so we have offices now in London and Berlin, and Europe is about a third of our business now. And then obviously just in terms of like the attitude and culture that we have internally of people wearing multiple hats, we've had to unfortunately cut people because of the pandemic. But the people that we have remaining at the business are committed, resilient, they're ready to fight. Right. And so we're in this position where we got hit by a tsunami, obviously in Q2, I think just like anyone else serving offices. But from Q2, we've grown every single quarter, even though people have not really returned to offices. And I think that is just the evidence of the resilience that we've been able to build as a company. So it's been tough, but I think we're coming out on the other side of this a much stronger business.
Yeah. I tried to, before this call, I tried to like put your hat on and try to say like, all right, what would I have done? And I feel like those first few months, like it's easier now, I think, to be able to see those tailwinds and say, okay, people are going to come back. When they go back to the office, they'll probably want more privacy, more protection. And that lends itself really well to your product anyway. And then long-term, the flexibility of the office. But in those first couple months, I imagine when you didn't know how long it was going to go for, that must have been just insane.
Yeah, there was a period, I think, I want to say in June, when there were lots of articles being shared around how the office would change, and there were these photos of plexiglass barriers, going up in offices, and people almost every day saying, "Hey, like, is Room going to go into the business of just like selling plexiglass barriers?" And we had to take a very disciplined look at our product roadmap and say, what are things that are kind of relevant during the pandemic, and especially here and now, versus what are things that have a longer time horizon that will create value for the business. And that's a tough one to navigate, right? And we decided to invest in expanding our core product portfolio, and I think that decision will prove to be the right one because we are very well positioned today to help companies return to offices and make those very difficult decisions around how to reconfigure and design offices in a future-proof way, right? And but yeah, I think if we just listen to what the direction of the wind was telling us, we might be in the business right now of just selling plexiglass. I'm glad that we're not.
Yeah, I am too. So that's a great transition to this idea of like manifesting the future. And so when you think about, you've had to make some serious strategic decisions in the last 12 months to set yourself up. But when you kind of fast forward, close your eyes and imagine room 5 years from now, paint that picture of what you want it to look like, especially considering this kind of hybrid environment of working that people are going to be in.
Like you said about, I think we're used to conceiving of offices as being static in time, and something that an architect or an interior designer designs at one point in time, and that's what you live with. In 5 years, what we are building towards is a future where the office is not fixed in time at all, but instead, it's something that is highly dynamic. It's something that is both sensing and adapting. So, what I mean by that is our products that we've launched this year actually all come embedded with occupancy sensors so that we can help companies understand how space is being utilized, when they're being utilized, how frequently they're being utilized, how many people are utilizing them. And that combination of being able to surface data and insights to our customers, when you can pair that with modular products that are easy to configure, you have an office that adapts with you and becomes optimized to the needs of the worker. And that's the kind of office you want to return to. If you know that when you go into your office building and you sit down at a workstation, that it's truly purpose built for you and for the number of people in your office and for the type of work that you do, that's something that you can really look forward to. So there's a lot that still is required for us to build to get to that. But the optimized office is really, the always optimized office is really what we're building.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I saw the collaboration, I think this was pre-pandemic, but still relevant, that you guys did with Calm, where you made those phone booths specifically for meditation. And I think what's going to happen at some point, whether it's next year, 2 years, 5 years, there's a lot of other functional spaces that are going to need to be put in offices to give people a reason to go in. Like if you're working from home, but you can also work out on your Peloton, do your meditation all at home, you're not going to want to come in unless you have space where you can dedicate for that. And so I think, what's interesting and what my wheels are already spinning with what you guys can do is you can start creating functional spaces that aren't just dedicated to office space.
No, for sure. Calm was a great collaboration for us because it gives employers a way to show their commitment to providing employees with wellness spaces, right? And every experience that you have in the office can be more purposefully designed for. And I think video conferencing actually is another great example. In the kind of pre-pandemic office, walking into a conference room where you have some people who are part of a meeting in that conference room and some people dialing in, that's a terrible experience. There's always these strange echoes, or the video conferencing isn't working, or the microphone is off, or people can't hear. Everybody has kind of experienced that pain because the reality is people haven't been designing for that hybrid mode of collaboration. That's one of the things that we're very excited about is we have the opportunity to design very purposefully for these new modalities of work.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you think about growth, a question I like to ask, and I think I actually asked it to Matteo, who nominated you. So I'd love to get your perspective as well. So it's kind of this idea of this 10x growth, and I think it's never been more important for you. I'm sure you're having investor calls all the time where you're talking specifically about how you're going to add a zero to the business over the next couple of years. And so when you think about that, I know you've got all these new products. What does that growth playbook look like? What are some of the interesting things that you're excited to try in the next year?
Well, if you want to grow 10x, I think that the reality of it, and I'm not sure, I'm curious what Matteo said, but I think the reality is that to grow, it's you have to grind it out, and it has to be success compounding upon success. It's very rare that you can have kind of a moment in time blip that lets you get to 10x right away, but it has to be kind kind of grinding it out. What is the right channel? What's the right messaging? What's the right customer? Or do they have a great experience? And it's just constant attention and iteration, testing, reacting. And that's the only way you can go from, really 10x a business. For us, really, it is grinding it out. But I think that it's what I mentioned before, that foot traffic is really what compounds for us. And this has very much been the story of our growth to date, which is an office manager gets complaints from employees about lack of privacy or too much noise. They buy a phone booth. All of a sudden, people realize that it's a great environment in which to do focused work or to take phone calls. Then the office manager gets requests to go from one phone booth to 10. And then, that company is selling products to another company, and their salespeople are taking calls from phone booths. And then all of a sudden, it's this snowball effect, right? So, but the snowball effect only happens if you are really diligent about every single step of that customer journey, right? So to me, I don't think there's a magic kind of like 10x wand that can be waved. It's really about the small wins compounding over and over again.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to, I'm sure you guys have thought of this, like experientially manufacture that foot traffic. So like instead of having to force people to get into an office to see it, you guys do something where you make a pop-up with like 3 phone booths outside in a park or something, and people are working out of it, right? And it just gives them a sense of, oh wait, this is because I feel like your product is so great that it's the issue is probably just exposure, right? Awareness of people seeing it in person.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I think the traditional mindset of how you do a showroom for a company that builds commercial interiors is you have this pristine. At least I don't know if this is actually the way it works, but in my mind, it's you would walk into a pristine showroom where things are very nicely laid out. Everything is kind of in the right corner. For us, we've never thought of a showroom that way. We want our product to be in use. We want our product to be in a live environment so that you can see it in action. And it's not one showroom that you visit, but you see it in everyday walk of life.
Yeah, totally. All right, I've got one more question in this section, and then we'll shift to some others. So it's the startup manifesto question, which we ask to every guest. So if you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
I think I forget who said it, but it's always best to think of your startup at first as a project. When you start, rather than as a business, when you start thinking about your startup as a business, you're starting to think about all the things that go into a business, like accounting, lawyers, a board. But in reality, if you're just starting out, if you think about it as a project, you can stay very lightweight and nimble in how you approach things, and you can also walk away from things very easily. And I guess it goes to that kind of like ball of yarn concept. If you have a project, you can pursue what makes sense, right? So that's one principle that I think is super important. A second one I would say is be a historian, be a student of history for your business and your industry. There's a startup graveyard with that can be studied in detail, right? And it's oftentimes, if you are going to be successful, sometimes a lot of it is going to be luck, but you're probably not the first person to try, right? So why have previous attempts failed, or why aren't larger companies doing this? I think a lot of founders assume that everybody else is, incapable, incompetent, and stupid, and not going to have these brilliant ideas. But I think that's very rarely the case. And so being a student of history helps you understand where you fit into this larger context, and I think is critical to helping a startup and a founder navigate all the different strategic decisions that need to be made. Number three, I would say when hiring, right? Know what excellence looks like. Like I said before, because I think that is absolutely critical. Number four, when it comes to customer acquisition, think about repeatable growth, because it can be easy to have kind of one-time hacks of growth, and sometimes that's what you need to get started. But you really want a repeatable growth engine, and that's what you should be focused on, rather than the shortcuts that might get you short blips of growth. And actually, I think crowdfunding is a great example of this. Crowdfunding is something that gives you a very nice spike in the beginning, but you can't build a business by always crowdfunding. And people have tried. But you build a business by providing a product that people come back to you repeatedly to use or to purchase, right? I would say another principle would be to always be learning from competitors, learning from customers, learning from people that you hire. I mean, if you're building a startup and you're doing it right, then you should, like, the learning curve is going to be steep along every single dimension, and you just need to be a studious learner and maintain that kind of humility that's required to always be a sponge.
That's 5. Perfect. Yeah, that's a great list. Appreciate that. All right, so let's shift into, I guess this is section 3, and then we'll get into the brainstorm. A couple questions here, quick hitters for you. So the first one is around skill development. And, I'm fascinated by this. What do you think differentiates great CEOs from like the good CEOs? And for the people that are aspiring to lead, what do you think they should do to try to develop some of those skills, or what experience should they get early in their career to kind of prepare them to traverse that gap?
I mean, this is you're flipping the equation on me, right? Because you're asking what excellence looks like.
Yeah, but for you, the job you've done before.
Yeah, I think that the greatest CEOs are just voracious learners, and oftentimes you see that in these CEOs being voracious readers as well, right? But it's leadership is never a craft that you master. I feel there's always something more to learn, new situations that require different types of responses, and I think part of being a voracious learner is never being satisfied with an answer, and always questioning, what others may take for granted. Right? There's never one style of leadership that works in all situations. So having that healthy skepticism around the existing answers around you will push you to the next level. Right? My thought was, let me get my reps with people who've done it before and who I can learn from. And so for me, that's what led me to Endeavor at first. I said, okay, I want to become an entrepreneur. And before I joined Endeavor, I was working at a financial institution, and I looked around and asked myself, how many of my colleagues are going to be starting companies in the next 12 months? And the answer was 0, right? And that was a problem. So that's why I joined Endeavor. It was to learn from and make sure that I was immersed in this network and ecosystem of other people who wanted to build businesses. And when I started Bluesmart, my co-founders were founders who had previous successes and who, it was my first time as a founder, but I wasn't ready to be, a founder and CEO. So I joined up with other co-founders who had done it before. And that was the way that I built my rep, right? Kind of piggybacking off of that. But for me with Bluesmart, it was very important that I was a co-founder from day zero, because I knew that that's the muscle I needed to build to do it myself. And ultimately, that's the only way to build confidence. You keep on doing something, you keep on questioning, you do it with great people, and then one day, all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I could do that job. And then you start doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer, because it's like, in my mind, it's not just getting reps, it's getting quality reps. And like that, when you surround yourself with those people who've done it before, there is no more quality than that, right? Like that's the cream of the crop.
And I think I sometimes see founders who in reality end up spinning their wheels for years. And there's always stories of people who work on a problem, have zero traction for like 5 years, and then all of a sudden it works because they've been so obstinate about solving a specific problem. I think that's the exception. I think that people can actually end up wasting a lot of time by spinning their wheels if you don't have traction, if you don't have the right product, if you don't have the right founding team. Oftentimes, it's better to move on to the next iteration of or the next rep. So, I think you're absolutely right. Quality reps and being very, I guess, like wide-eyed about what you're learning from it. Honestly, it's a lot easier to learn from success than it is from failure.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, what's one, I call this like the needle mover habit or tactic. So like, what's one tactic or tip or habit that someone introduced to you early on in your life or career that you've implemented pretty consistently that's kind of been the biggest needle mover for you in your life?
I would say it was reading the book Getting Things Done by David Allen, and just the methodology of getting things done. I mean, he has a methodology of how you put things into a backlog and prioritize, and that has been the biggest needle mover for me in terms of my own productivity. Asana is a product that was really built off of the philosophy of getting things done.
Okay, perfect. No bigger praise than that. All right, one more question, then we'll shift to the brainstorm. So this is around wellness, and I'm so passionate about wellness, and I believe wellness works like a stack. And so there's these different pillars: fitness, nutrition, sleep, meditation, and they all combine together to be like a 1 + 1 = 3 or potentially more. And so when even one of those is out of whack, the whole system can break, but together they're incredibly powerful. And so for you, what I'm curious about is, like, how do you think about wellness in your life, and what are some of the routines or habits that you have across some of those competencies?
For me personally, I'm not like Mateo. I have a ton of respect for Mateo. Mateo is like a paragon of those, like all 5 of those pillars, right, of wellness that you're talking about. For me, I think what's been most important is maintaining a healthy sense of balance. For me, that means preserving weekends to not do work. Building a company from scratch is an all-consuming effort, but you're going to burn out if you don't have some sense of balance, right? So, for me, it's really preserving weekends, and it's also fitness in terms of running. I love running, which is kind of a state of meditation for me, and making sure I have that elevated heart rate for 30 minutes, 1 hour every day.
Yeah, I love it. All right, so we've got 2 questions left. The first one before we get to the brainstorm is more like emerging trends at a higher level. So what are a couple of just like areas that really excite you, either if you were to put an investor hat on or just as a consumer for the next kind of 2 to 3 years?
One trend that gets me excited is the housing market becoming a lot more liquid. I mean, there are companies doing working on this like Zillow or Open Door, but I think that there's especially actually accelerated by the pandemic, the idea of, for me living in New York, spending 1 month of the summer away from New York where I can work remotely. Those types of living experiences are going to be enabled by a much more liquid housing market. What I mean by that is like the line starts to blur a little bit between what it means to stay in a hotel versus what it means to stay in an apartment, or what is the difference between an Airbnb and a short-term rental of 2 months, right? And what's the difference between if you can, buy a place and it's a very liquid market, then it becomes a lot easier to do what I said, where you're having a hybrid living experience. Maybe you're spending the month of February in Utah so you can go skiing and then you work during the day. Or, I think those things are very exciting for me because I love New York City, and I'm very bullish on New York. But I also love being outside New York City, and I'm excited for all the things that will make that a reality. What else? I think another thing that I'm another trend that I'm very excited about is the way that talent and labor can be accessed. I think it's become clear. I love talking to people who have a ton of experience and are really smart in what they do, and getting their advice and learning as much as possible. And there are expert networks where you can pay like hourly consultation fees to tap into an expert in X field. And I think primarily they're used by hedge fund investors to get information about markets. But that concept of we have all of this tacit knowledge in communities, and a lot of that knowledge is untapped or difficult to access. That I think will start to change, and I think that's like something that I'm very excited about. I saw a company recently that calls it like fractional talent, or you see it in startups often. When they're hiring a part-time CFO. But how do you access the best, world-class experience, world-class expertise when you need it, without having to always hire for it? That to me is a very exciting trend that I think we will see accelerate.
Yeah, I totally agree. That kind of solves a little bit of the hiring problem with identifying the excellence. When you have pre-vetted, community-vetted fractional experts, it's easier to trust that those people are world-class, right? And then you can bring them in fractionally. I love that. All right, let's shift to the brainstorm. So I'm really pumped for this. So let's say Room was gone. Long live Room, but let's just pretend for this example it's gone. What's one idea that excites you right now that if you had a clean slate you would think about pursuing?
I mean, I think one of these two trends definitely sound interesting to me. So some kind of fractional talent expert network type of thing becomes maybe that would be something I would dive into further.
Yeah. How do you think? So just to dive into it, like riff on it a little bit. Do you think the bigger constraint would be convincing the world-class experts that a portion of their time should be spent kind of on a consultative basis versus them chunking their time into like 2 or 3 or one project they want to go all in on? Do you think that's a constraint, or what do you think is the biggest barrier to doing that?
I think one of the hardest pieces to crack, and this is I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about it, right? But I think if you move towards an hourly consultation model, it becomes very transactional, and I don't think knowledge wants to be transactional. or a sharing of expertise and experience. I don't think it wants to be transactional. Like the best advice I've always gotten, or the best conversations I've had, have been, me getting introduced via mutual connection and someone giving me their time because they want to, and they're, as a result, generous with their insights. I think there's something that happens, something that gets crowded out when you convert that into being transactional. So I think that's something, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's an obstacle kind of behaviorally that would need to be cracked.
Yeah. The other thing that I think will be a challenge is there's a lot of like onboarding time that's required. Like if you were to hire a fractional CMO, in order to get the best value, there's probably an uptake time of, let's say, 3 weeks. You can spend that person full time for 3 weeks, or if they're fractional 1 day a week, it's going to take you 15 weeks for them to get that same knowledge. And so it becomes difficult for people to manage, to just task switch almost and be able to have the deep context in your business to get you the insights. But if you could solve that though, that opens a world of possibilities if you're able to somehow systematize that onboarding a little bit.
Yeah. I'm curious, really what other brainstorm ideas you've had, or what stands out for you from your prior conversations?
Yeah, so we just switched to this format 3 episodes ago. So you're the 3rd episode going through it. So the first episode we had, we talked. So the founder is big into wellness. They do it's called June. They enable corporate wellness benefits for companies, and so the first thing was a direct to consumer bread subscription, believe it or not. So I think in the pandemic, the idea of baking bread has become a big thing. And he was saying that it would be really interesting to combine the idea of like a cloud kitchen with kind of local bakeries and get fresh, almost artisanal bread delivered directly to your house. And could you expand that to be like you're sourcing the best chocolates, the best cheeses, the best breads from these different places?
So I think I want a jean subscription business. I feel like
me too.
I wear out my jeans about pretty reliably, like once every 12 months, and then there are holes to be patched, and then I have to go and like buy, and I kind of know what I like when it comes to jeans. I don't want to go out and buy those jeans every single time and get them tailored every single time. And, I would love to have a jean subscription business.
Yeah, just like clockwork. Every 12 months, you just get a new pair, exact same
every 12
size.
months, and maybe the older pair, goes to gets refurbed and donated or something. But I would love to, like, it's also really hard to find jeans that fit the way that you like. And
that's what I was going to say. That's the hardest part about jeans. I feel like, especially for men, it's impossible to find the right fit.
So I want jeans that fit really well, that I don't have to go out and rebuy every 12 months.
Yeah. And that would be a massive opportunity.
Yeah.
I feel like every guy's tried on, I've tried on 10 different brands, and they seem to, sometimes they fit in the store, and then you get them home, you wash them one time. And
so why doesn't that exist?
That's what I don't understand. That's a great idea.
If you want to start it, let me know. And
yeah, that's great. So that's a really compelling one. The other one in the last episode hasn't dropped yet. But the 2 things we talked about, this one was actually really interesting. So it's the founder of Monument. So it's an online alcohol treatment platform. He's had a couple exits with some different businesses, but he has a unique kind of venture model where instead of just deploying capital, he gets excited about these ideas and he finds an operator, and then he spends like 5% of his time in the first couple months getting it off the ground, and then takes a little bit of equity and just helps on a consultative basis. So his latest one is he found this guy in Europe that's taking 1990s Land Rover Defender trucks, buying them in Europe, and then like refurbishing them. There's like a stop in Amsterdam, and then there's a stop in Connecticut, and he's working with this guy to create almost like a Build-A-Bear type experience where you can see where your truck is and like the components you're buying. And he said it's really affordable somehow. Like it's the same price as like a normal sedan, like a Honda sedan would be, which is crazy. So that was one he's pursuing that we talked about as well.
Yeah. I'm gonna think more about this jeans subscription business because I think I feel like that's a product that I would want.
Yeah. What do you think is the reason why, just on the fit side, like the delivery subscription is critical as well. Like I can't believe no one's done that. But like what on the fit side, why do you think it's so inconsistent to find jeans that fit?
I mean, I think the reality is you have high heterogeneity of body types. You got like people who are wider with shorter legs. You got people with like long legs. I mean, I think it's you have people with very different body types.
It's funny though that I feel like you have less of a problem with shirts. Like you would say it's hard to find shirts that fit, but it seems a little easier than jeans for some reason.
You know, I think yeah, I think there's maybe more margin for error because if you have like a shirt that's baggy, then the fit maybe matters a little bit less. But yeah, jeans. I think also maybe from a fashion perspective, like there's probably jeans have gone from being very baggy to being a lot less baggy, and so they're a little bit more, I don't know, like form fitting and tighter. In which case, like the shape of it kind of matters more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Think more on it. Let me know. Let me know if you make any progress. So before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge you for a second. You know, as I'm obviously hosting this and driving it, but I'm a huge fan. And so just listening for things to take away and that really inspire me. And I think there's a couple of things from this conversation that just I really held on to. One, I think you're a really humble guy. You can tell that you've accomplished a ton in your career. You've been, you know, YC, MIT, startup with an exit, Room is killing it. And I think it's easier said than done to do all those things and not be humble and down to earth. And you exude that. And so I think, you know, there's so many other things I took from this conversation, but if people listen and that's all they take, I think they'll be better off. So I just want to thank you again so much for coming on, and I'll continue to be a huge fan of Room moving forward.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
For sure. Brian Chen, founder of Room, thank you so much for coming on the show.